Thank you. Thank you, everyone. It's really great to see a full house like this. Always get a little bit nervous at crowds. Can you believe it? This is the first not entirely English-speaking country we visited in the last few months. I wasn't even sure what language it was. I couldn't believe that I didn't know. I mean, I feel, but you know, I have an excuse. I'm American. I'm not supposed to know anything outside my own borders. So let's get started. Whenever people think about the United States and my country's current political situation, the laughable and seemingly insane, idiotic ideologues that usually come to mind are Christian dominionists, or usually tend to be. Now, dominionism isn't something that's exclusive to Christianity. Islam has its own version of that. But the dominionists are the ones that believe that their religion should overrun and overrule and ultimately eliminate all other faiths, eventually enveloping the whole world so that everybody, everywhere, must submit to that, what should be or what would become a one world theocracy. And the fact that there are both Christians and Muslims who each think that their religion should dominate and subdue every other faith and eliminate free thinkers with no faith should chill anybody that can see the trends and is capable of pattern recognition. Not every Muslim is like that, and not every Christian either. Religions tend to be a lot nicer when they don't have a whole lot of political power. For example, most of my family are Mormons, and that's not surprising because I come from an area where Mormons dominate. There's an area of Nevada, Utah, and Arizona that where the Mormons seem to own and control everything. And there are places where it's hard to get a job if you're not one of them. But Mormons understand better than any other Christian denomination the importance of a secular government separating church and state. And they understand that just because a law is unconstitutional, and obviously so, doesn't mean that it won't get passed anyway, because despite the provision that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, it still happens when legislators constantly try to do both. And one particularly grievous example of that comes from Missouri Governor Lilburn Boggs. In 1838, he issued the Executive Order 44, which was essentially a Mormon execution order. At that time, Mormons were considered a cult and a security threat. So whole families were driven from their homes and massacred in the Mormon War that went on in Illinois and Missouri. And this is why the Mormons fled to Utah, and many of them had to make that exodus during the winter, so many of them died in transit during the travel. Executive Order 44, the Mormon execution order, was not repealed until 1976. So that grossly and obviously unconstitutional law not only passed, but it stood for 138 years. Now, although members of my family usually identified as Mormon, I never did. And I don't know why they did. Most of them smoked and drank and fought and fornicated, were frequently arrested, and never went to church ever in their lives except to get married. So why did they call themselves Mormon? Now, other parts of my family, the stricter Mormons, were the ones that thought that sugar and cinnamon and caffeine were stimulants not to be taken. And these are the ones that actually wore the magic underwear. And they referred to the disreputable members of my family as Jack Mormons. And that's somebody who doesn't practice the religion and may not know or care what the practice of the religion is, but because they came from a Mormon family and they haven't declared any other religion either, the church still gets to claim them. Because once your name is on their logbooks, it stays there. So every few years, I get a visit from a fresh set of Mormon missionaries wanting to know why I'm not active, even though I never have been. Coincidentally, the Mormons also claim to be one of the fastest Christian denominations, because they don't exclude when people drop out without transferring to a different religion. If they drop out of religion entirely, then they're still part of the church. And that's why the church can claim to have 14 million people. I'm on the list of people they have, if that tells you anything. Now, I was baptized because my mommy made me do it. And she convinced me that this is something that every 8-year-old boy had to do. But I never identified as a Mormon myself, because logically, how could I? I didn't know everything that Mormons are supposed to believe, and until I know that, then how do I know whether I believe all of that too? Likewise, I didn't know what any of the other religions believed, and until I know that, then how can I know that I wouldn't have more affinity with one of them? And I think this is the only logical step one can take regarding religion, and considering the limited amount of information that I had. And I have to wonder, why doesn't any other kid think like this? Why doesn't every other kid think like this? Whenever I see Muslims in America trying to be integrated and just get along, I have a kind of a degree of empathy with them, because I have an idea of what they're going through. Because when I lived in an area where Mormons were dominant, of course, we were the ones that made the rules. But when we moved to places where Mormons were rare, then we got to hear how weird we are. As soon as people would find out that my family was Mormon, people would start telling me all of these crazy things that Mormons believe. And I'd invite them into my house, say, you want to go tell my mom that she believes all these crazy things? But that invitation was always refused, and I found that suspicious. And don't get me wrong, Mormons do believe some really silly things. For instance, they believe that before we were born, or we existed before we were born in spirit form, but we didn't have bodies yet. When you're born, you get a body, and you get to keep that body even after you die, and there's some amusing implications with that. I remember being a little kid and wondering about all these people that were being buried, and thinking, you know, if you have 6 billion people dying, then you're going to fill up the whole planet with gravestones. Why don't we just cremate people? And my mother freaked out, saying that we're supposed to rise from the grave at some time. And I said, well, what about the people that have been like eaten by sharks? Or burned up in a fire? What's supposed to happen to them? But when they have this belief that Jesus and God are separate people. You have, God the Son and God the Father, which is Jesus, and a different character, Yahweh. And the Holy Ghost, which is the third triad in the Trinity. And by the way, Mormons are not a Trinitarian denomination. The Holy Ghost does not have a body because he's never been born yet. God, of course, has a body. And I had questions about that too. I remember challenging the Mormon missionaries. Why is it that God exists everywhere and every when throughout the cosmos, and his arms reach this far? And he has nipples. And an intestinal tract, and an immune system, and lungs that he can't use. Does God just keep this body under a tarp in the garage? Because when does he get to use it? And another amusing belief added to this is that while we're in this enigmatic before world, we choose our parents. Now it doesn't explain, we choose how, what people we're going to be born to, but they don't explain how we choose both of our parents, as if our parents didn't choose each other. But, now think about it. If this is true, and you chose your parents before you were born, think about the parents you chose. What does that say about divine guidance and wisdom? And if your parents lived in Utah, then you would likely be Mormon. But if this is the true religion, and you get to choose your parents before you're born, then you must not know where your parents live or what they believe. Because if you pick parents who happen to live in Kuwait, you're almost certainly going to be Muslim. And if you pick parents who live in Thailand, you might be trained to believe in a whole collection of other gods. So, if there is such a thing as a true religion, then it's up to you to find out what it is. And you can't assume that it belongs to your parents. Your parents' religion is not your religion simply because it's theirs. Other denominations like to say that Christians are not, other denominations like to say that Mormons are not really Christian. But Mormons think they're Christian. And other denominations say that there's some sort of a cult. that they're not really Christian because they don't follow the teachings of Jesus. But Mormons follow the teachings of Jesus, and they worship in the church called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So how can other denominations say that my family's religion is not really Christian? What is the criteria if you're going to identify yourself as Christian or decide that someone else is not a true Christian? Every definition of Christian that Christians themselves provide applies to Mormons. And one source that I read says that a true Christian is a person who has put faith and trust in the person and work of Jesus Christ, including his death on the cross from sins, or as a payment for sins, and his resurrection on the third day. And this applies to Mormons. And this means that Mormons are true Christians. And curiously, every definition I've ever said or ever seen that describes what a cult is includes the whole of Christianity. The same people who say that Mormons are not Christian also say that Catholics aren't Christian. And these same people argue that Christianity is the leading and most popular religion on earth, the dominant religion on earth. 2.1 billion people, roughly a third of the planet, is Christian, and Dominionists should be happy about that. But Catholics make up just over 1/2 of that total Christian collective. So if Catholics aren't really Christian, then Christianity isn't the leading religion anymore. Islam is. And it's going to be that way anyway, eventually. Islam already has 1.5 billion people and has been rated to be the fastest growing religion for decades, while Christianity is in a general state of decline worldwide. The math isn't hard to work out. And it's a frustrating thing for me as an activist in America, because every time somebody tries to establish laws to grant privileges to Christianity, they don't realize that they're also granting privileges to other religions. And when they realize that this faith-based initiative also applies to Islam, and that maybe Islam should be taught in school as well, suddenly they step over to my side and start talking about secular politics. But as fast as Islam is growing, irreligious secularism is growing even faster. As people of every religion begin walking away from faith, not just the faith that they were raised in, faith itself. The idea of having to believe impossible nonsense for no good reason, and then all of the objectionable practices associated with that. American Protestants are just hurrying that along with all their hypocrisy, corruption, denial of reality, sexual repression, oppression of gays, their economic and ecological irresponsibility, militant tactics of forced conformity, and so on. And they tend to be absolutely wrong about absolutely everything. And I've read deconversion stories where American atheists describe the reasons why they're no longer Christian. And it usually is in the line of what the Bible says, what the church does, and what they want you to believe, and why. And you'd think that the good work of science figures in prominently there, but it doesn't. It's the bad work of religion that is driving its own people away. And none of this is news to a European audience, but Americans are very insular, and they don't want to see trends that are coming for them. Otherwise, they wouldn't be dissing their allies. If Catholics aren't Christian, then there are actually fewer Christians in the world than there are people with no religion at all. And those who exclude Catholicism from the Christian collective also exclude Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, Orthodoxy, and a number of other would-be allies. And if these groups aren't really Christian and only Protestant denominations like Baptists and Pentecosts are, then Christianity is actually the 4th largest religion, below Catholicism and below Hinduism. And bear all this in mind the next time someone tells you that Christianity isn't a religion, it's a philosophy. Ask them, what is the #1 religion on earth? See if they're ready to concede that title to Islam. And we know that Christianity is not a philosophy, because a philosophy is a rational analysis of the truths and principles of being, knowledge, and conduct. And Christianity doesn't qualify. Because asserting your conclusion, or assuming your conclusion and asserting it with complete conviction in lieu of evidence, and then refusing to be reasoned with, is irrational by anyone's standard. That's not philosophy, that's faith. And it's a faith that is unexamined, because there's nothing they can actually show to be true. So there's nothing they can honestly say that they really know. All they can do is interpret their folklore, and there's no agreement on the interpretations of folklore either. That's why there's dozens of different denominations and or dozens of different opinions on differing denominations. I think there's something like the order of 30,000 different denominations of Christianity, and by another token, there's as many different denominations of Christianity as there are Christians in the pews. Because nobody can tell who is right, and everybody is apparently wrong. So how do we know whether Christianity is a religion? We first have to know what a religion is. Now my professor in the history of world religion said that word defies definition. And I told him that it can be defined if you follow the rules of systematic classification. If you're going to categorize any collective, you must first identify all of the traits held in common by every member already universally accepted as part of that set. Define the category accordingly, and then you can identify whether some future addition belongs there or not. For example, if you're looking at gods, you can't define your definition of God such that gods with a little g, such that it only applies to God of a big G. And remember that Hindus also consider their patron godhead to be God with a big G too. You can't define a god as a creator either, because that doesn't apply to Thor, Dionysus, or Shiva, and they are universally considered gods. So regardless, whichever god you want to posit as the one true God, remember that Krishna, Ishtar, Apollo, Odin, Horus, and Guan Yu were each worshipped by millions of people over thousands of years. So your definition has to include them. You can't simply omit other people's gods by definitional fiat. Neither can you redefine God such to say that God is love, or God is nature, or God is the laughter of children. Because that doesn't apply to anyone else's God. And it damn sure doesn't apply to the God of Abraham. For future reference, all gods have human characteristics and miraculous abilities, and if you destroy their physical bodies, they'll either get another one or they'll continue on without one. So a god can be summarily defined as a magical, anthropomorphic immortal. That's what all gods are. That's what a god is, because that's what all gods are. And similarly, every religion universally accepted as such is a faith-based belief system which includes the notion that some element of self, your memories, some aspect of your consciousness, whatever, can somehow transcend the death of the physical body and continue on after that. And remember this if you ever meet a creationist, because not only do they like to pretend that Christianity is not a religion, but they like to pretend that evolution somehow is, even though it meets none of the criteria. Now, several people have tried to tell me that my definition of religion is invalid because that there are exceptions. And if that were true, then they'd have a point. But so far, I don't know of any exceptions. There are some beliefs that don't qualify as religion, but also aren't usually considered as such. Taoism, for example. The core of that canon is that nature acts without intent, and so cannot be said to be benevolent nor malevolent to anything. But Taoism is usually associated or intertwined with Confucianism and traditional Chinese spiritualism, so it becomes a component of a religion without actually being a religion itself. It's still an independent concept. And I've been told that the Pharisees and the Sadducees didn't believe in a supernatural afterlife, but according to the Jewish Virtual Library, they did, and they are the spiritual fathers of modern Judaism. So I went to a Theravada Buddhist temple, armed with my new definition with the intent of testing it. And the teacher there said that Buddhism was not a religion because Buddha is not a god. They don't believe in the self, and they don't believe in any form of afterlife, not even reincarnation. They said that you can't be born again if you've never really been born at all. And that was when I pointed out that everyone in that room had a birth certificate. Moments later, that same teacher said that he prays to Buddha and that Buddha answers him by miraculous means. And so I said, okay, so by your own admission, Buddha is a magical anthropomorphic immortal who answers prayers and performs miracles, so he is a god after all. And he started losing patience with me, but he continued. And he said that moments later, he said that you may be a ghost for a while before you come to live in another body or another form. I can't remember exactly how he phrased it. And I said, wait a minute, what do you mean you? You mean you as in yourself? The self you don't believe in will somehow transcend the death of the physical body and continue on in another form? That is the very definition of religion. And after that, they didn't want to talk to me anymore. Now, I don't think that this guy speaks for all of Buddhism. He was a teacher in this temple, and the temple was the hub of a Thai Buddhist community. But the teacher was not Thai. He was an American Caucasian convert, and it may be that he was carrying remnants of his own doctrine into the new religion. But I've also seen Oriental Buddhism represented the same way, where Buddha appears in visions, where he communicates psychically through impressions, and where he performs miracles in the same vague, inconsistent, indeterminable, and mysterious way that Yahweh does. And I met other Buddhists whose Buddhism wasn't appreciably different than pantheism. Some of them believe only in cause and effect. And one of these was from India, and I asked her, why do you call yourself Buddhist? Why not atheist? And she admitted that her brand of Buddhism was exactly atheism, but that she thought that atheism was empty, and that Buddhism had a cultural attachment to rituals, traditions, ceremonial costumes, holy days, revered figures, ancient scriptures, and even mythology. Well, what does atheism have? A remake of Cosmos? And I should note that neither Carl Sagan nor Neil deGrasse Tyson have ever publicly identified as atheist, even though that title definitely applies to both of them. I've met several people who tell me that just because I don't believe in gods doesn't mean I'm an atheist. Well, yeah, it kind of exactly is what that means. Unfortunately, that's all that means. It doesn't mean that you're a skeptic or a pistivist or a humanist, and ideally you should be all of these. And I've been to a lot of airports lately, and it's kind of fun to point out the different faiths. You know, those women are Muslim, and that guy's turban means that he's a Sikh. And look at these Hasidic Jews trying to get on an airplane with no women on it. And you see the hippie chick with the pentacle? She probably calls herself a witch. Where are the atheists? How do you point them out? Because if you don't wear the label on your t-shirt, there's no way to know. Now I think that most atheists neither want nor need any of that kind of cultural crap. But I know a lot of atheists who identify as humanists because they actually do want something similar to what religion has. You know, a sense of community that also has a sense of ethics. And the problem is that you can be culturally Hindu and culturally Jewish and culturally Christian, but you can't be culturally atheist. It seems to be that your religion is a costume that you wear, like creating a character for a role-playing game. And humanism can't compete with shaved heads and saffron robes on an eightfold path out of an opium den. You don't even need to believe in all of the associated dogma in order to sign up for all the fluff and the cosplay and the jewelry and the incense. And I know all about that because when I left the family religion, I went into neo-pagan spiritualism, and that had its own uniquely distinct affectations and accoutrements. And that's what I think religion is. It's a costume you wear, as I said. I have a friend that said he used to be a skeptic, but now he believes in all kinds of spiritual woo, and a weird kind of mix between pagan and Christian spiritualism. Both. Like Christianity and Egyptian mythology kind of intertwined in his own head, along with a whole lot of other stuff that, like homeopathy and everything like that. So I said, finally, is there any unsupported and indefensible nonsense you don't believe? And he took that as an attack on his culture. I said, that's not your culture. That's something you made up. It's something you adopted and can be rejected. So your ethnicity and your religious beliefs are not the same thing. And I have another friend who always described himself as theistic. And he said to me one day, he said, I'm Christian because I like to believe that, not because I think it's true. Think about that for a minute. He thought he was correcting my misconception, but he hasn't seized on the idea that if you don't think it's true, then you don't really believe it. And I've met a lot of other Christians who make admissions kind of along the same way, so that they're using the word believe differently than I would. What I believe is a logical consequence of my understanding of the information, and that position will obligately change as the facts demand. But the way they use the word believe seems like you put a hyphen and make in front of it. Make believe seems to be what they're doing, and it's very often it seems that they know on some level at least that what they pretend to believe isn't really true, and somehow that doesn't matter. Or if they're not pretending, they're just wearing the labels for reasons that I can't understand. I met a pair of Hindu siblings, or excuse me, Indian siblings, who identified as Hindu. And I was excited to talk to them because I had some questions about the Mahabharata that most people in America would certainly not be able to answer. And so I had these questions, and they interrupted me saying that we are Hindu because our parents are Hindu, not because we believe that. And I was a little lost again. So on further inquiry, I discovered that they don't believe in any gods. So why call yourself Hindu? Is it because atheism doesn't give you an excuse to wear a bindi or an elegant flowing sari? This again seems to be part of the costume, part of the ritual, part of the character that you've created as part of your identity. So, in their case, and also in my friend's case, it seems that whatever religion you're born in is whatever religion you are, just because that was the religion of your parents. And I have to wonder if that doesn't apply to politics too, because it seems to in Texas. If you're a Tea Partier, it can only be because your daddy was, and somehow you still respect him anyway. And I wonder if there shouldn't be a place on the birth certificate to put in your decision as to whether your kid is going to be a libertarian. But you can walk away from religion. I represent American Atheists, and most of whom are former Christians. And Britain, of course, has the Council of Ex-Muslims, so there are networks of people you can connect to, and if you're interested afterward, you can talk to me about the Clergy Project, because I know the people behind that as well. You can also change your religion, but most people who do that for all the wrong reasons. Historically, for example, the Vikings accepted the Christian God as part of a real estate deal. And in other places, people are forced at gunpoint to profess belief, as if you can take that to be sincere, or does that mean anything? The historic origin for Dracula was captured and forced to change teams in the war between the Orthodox and the Catholics. Others claim a new religion for political or romantic reasons. For example, in 2009, American movie star Lindsay Lohan fell in love with a Jewish girl. And Lohan was raised as a Catholic. But she wanted to honor her new girlfriend by changing religion. And what I thought was intriguing about that, apart from the fact that Lindsay Lohan is in a lesbian love affair, was that she said that she didn't say that she had already changed her religion. She planned to do that next month. Now, I have no idea what goes on in somebody's head when they're thinking about things like this. But this is my impression of what she might have been thinking. Right now I accept that Jesus is the Son of God and Santa Maria, the Virgin Mother, and that believing in them is my only hope of salvation. But I want to honor my lover by distorting my comprehension of historical reality. So I've decided that next month I will stop believing what I believe to be true right now and will adopt a belief that I currently consider to be a damnable blasphemy. But it's all right, because 1 month from now I will also consider my current belief to be another form of idolatry, so it's all good. And somehow it doesn't matter to her that both religions prohibit homosexuality. It says that, if you notice, that changing her religion has nothing to do with changing her mind. This has nothing to do with anything she actually believes. This is just a label she wears. It's the clothing, as I said, that we adorn our identity. And my brother's the same way regarding the Dallas Cowboys football team. He wears their jerseys, wears their hats, drinks out of their coffee cup, buys all of their merchandise, and is completely irrational about it. And if you bring up that, if you try to tell him that the Dallas Cowboys haven't been to the Super Bowl since the 20th century, you started a fight. And he's not going to praise any other team because that would be blasphemy. And some people seem to choose their religion the same way. When we were in Northern Ireland, we were told that the Celtics were the Catholic team and Linfield was the Protestant team, or maybe vice versa. I'm not really sure. It doesn't really make any difference. The point is, the only way to tell the Catholics from the Protestants was by what football jersey they wore, because they're still Irish and they're not essentially different otherwise. It's just that the religion has created this artificial divide. And religion is like that. Wherever you live, it seems that everyone is forced to pick a team or choose a sport and then pick a team. And then once you're wearing the jersey, then that's who you are, even if you don't want or care to watch any of the games. And some people make their whole lives about that label, and those who don't still wear the label and won't give it up, even if they don't understand it. For example, I knew a girl that identified as a Catholic. And I said, well, do you think that the Pope is infallible? Do you do or believe whatever he says? And she looked at me confused and said, what's a Pope? And I know people who say, well, we're Christian. And that ends the conversation. Because they don't even know what that means. They either won't read the Bible, or they don't believe a word of it, except for the vague notion that there's a God. And they don't even believe in Jesus either, because a lot of these people, when you bring up some of the mistakes that Jesus made, like when he didn't know the smallest size of seeds, or when he told people not to wash their hands because diseases are all caused by demons, then these people forgive Jesus, saying, well, he was only human. The fundamentalists, on the other hand, are frequently in the news for believing absurdities and committing atrocities, while moderate believers claim to be so because of, or claim to be more reasonable because of how little of their faith they still cling to versus how much of it they now reject. And most everything I've said so far about Christianity applies to Islam too. Muslims cite many of the same reasons as Christians do for why they have left their faith and become apostates, have become atheists, despite the threat of death for apostasy. And according to the 13th chapter of the book of Deuteronomy, Judaism and Christianity can both make that same threat, and we know historically that they have. But the societies surround them the societies surrounding them have advanced to the point that they won't allow these religions to effect these kind of charges anymore. So they've tried to ostracize, excommunicate, or disfellowship apostates now. Religion is losing ground despite all of its draconian methods, and sometimes because of them. They use the stick and the carrot, promising impossible rewards for those who believe and threatening a fate worse than death for all that don't. Strict punishments are imposed for all independent or deviant thought because religion is a belief system with required beliefs and prohibited beliefs. Therefore, it is not free thought. And free thought is the very opposite. Dale McGowan, author of Raising Freethinkers, says that children should examine all their options and that they should hold true or hold only to the which makes sense to them, and that they're free to change their minds again and again as need be. That's the way it should be. I would say that if you don't actually believe in the doctrine, all of it, then you're not really part of that religion, and those labels should be avoided anyway. But some people choose those labels so that they can wear a cross or a hijab and join the family in celebration of the holy days, or they can be out with their friends and not be called out in some kind of conflict, at least as long as they live where they're the majority. They believe in books they won't read because it makes them feel good, or because it gives them a sense of community, or because they think that they'll get along better at church or at school, or, my favorite, because they think it'll get them more votes. But these are not reasons to believe. These are reasons to pretend to believe. And a lot of people just believe in belief, as if belief itself has some benefit or consequence, as if whether you believe it matters more than whether it is true. And I disagree. Why would I want to believe something that probably isn't true? That's the very definition of what it means to be a fool. And despite what the Bible says, a fool is someone who too readily accepts implausible claims on questionable sources and insufficient evidence. And it's no wonder why the Bible uses the very opposite definition. Usually, only accurate information has practical application. So in lieu of evidence, we should consider possibilities, but reserve judgment and not believe. There is no point or purpose in using a label that doesn't really apply or doesn't apply completely. And regardless whatever else it might imply, there is only one reason why anyone should believe or claim to believe anything. And that is only because it honestly seems to be, evidently or apparently at least, probably true. Thank you.